In the Perspectrum podcast, we discuss controversial topics. Outside of this context, Michael and I are both working professionals. While doing this show, we are not acting as agents or representatives of our respective institutions, and none of the views that we express reflect the outlooks of our employers. So don't come to my office and throw toilet paper at me.
And I don't have an office, but don't come to my cube. Hello and welcome to The Spectrum. I'm Michael Bloom.
And I'm Nathan Seelove.
We have a great episode for you today. We're going to start off by talking about none other than our incredible Kamala Harris's economic policies. This is her big opportunity to show the American people who are wavering on a knife's edge between staying home and voting for her that she can deliver for them. And so her economic populism is ultimately, in my opinion, the key to this election.
Yeah.
So we want to dive into what her policies are and what we think about them.
Yeah. And there's a lot to talk about.
Yes. Yeah. She has mentioned a lot of different policies. And a lot of them are relatively unconventional. So not the kind of thing that, there's a bunch written out there already on.
I went down some fucking rabbit holes looking at Harris's economic policies, so you're probably going to be hearing me go full on autistic in this episode in the best possible way.
Excellent. All right, so let's get into it. So as we already mentioned, economic policies are the key here. Republicans are traditionally poll higher than Democrats when people are asked who they trust to run the economy, which even though Trump is a crazy person, for some reason he's got some businessman bona fides, even though he's terrible at that. And even though his economic policies are absolutely fucking garbage, he's been running ahead of before Biden and then Kamala for a long time on who would be better for the economy, which is a key issue for voters right now.
Yeah. Which there has been a gradual shift, though. It is a little bit more even at this point, which is unique for an election. There have even been some polls that have shown that people actually trust Harris a little bit more on the economy, which when you look at what Trump is actually calling for, it kind of makes sense. Like, real quick, before we get into what Harris wants, let's get into what Trump wants. First off, we don't know what he wants for a lot of the time. All right.
Yes.
The only policies that we know are that he has the concept of a plan on healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to do across-the-board tariffs on all imports, which makes no fucking sense. And he claims that this is going to attack inflation, which doesn't make any sense either, because the entire point of a tariff is to raise prices to incentivize people to buy domestically. So if they are actually raising revenue, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. If they're raising prices, they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. But we don't want them to be doing that right now. So I'm not saying that I'm against tariffs in general, but they have to be targeted, and he's not targeting them.
Yeah, totally.
That's fucking stupid.
And even his non-economic policies would be an absolute disaster for the U.S. economy. Like deporting 11 million or 20 million, as he claims, migrants and immigrants would be a disaster. Further taking away the right to choose or passing a national abortion ban would be a huge problem. With economic impacts, like giving a huge tax cut to corporations and the wealthiest people would further drive inequality and also be a huge economic problem. So, to your point, Nathan, we don't know about that many policies. The policies we do know about, we know would be bad. And so ultimately, Kamala is way out ahead on her policies, even as they continue to kind of be developed and kind of socialized with the public. And so ultimately we're kind of grading on a curve here, a harsh one against Kamala, which is we're going to look at her policies and be like, is this slightly better or slightly worse? Whereas Trump is over there in the corner with his, economy destroying baseball bat. Just let me see what I can, let me see what legislation I can try to get to pass.
Yeah. So to be clear, we are looking at Kamala Harris's policies based off of kind of as objective measurements as we can find.
Yeah.
In a way that we're actually taking them seriously. But the fact that we're taking them seriously to begin with, the fact that some of them do, even the ones that might be a little bit questionable in some ways, or some of the ones that might have some decent counter arguments potentially on the other side, they're all leagues above whatever Trump is trying to do, because he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. Except there is one policy of Trump's that I want to talk about, because it's also a policy of Harris's. And I want to see what you think about this, Michael, because I am very mixed on this one. And
Yeah.
that is no tax on tips.
Yeah. I don't really get it. Like, I get why they might want to say we should do this policy. I don't really understand why that would be the policy of all the policies you could draw up that you would make. Like, yes, it would probably help tip workers. Tip workers have pretty wide discretion on what tips they declare to begin with, however.
Yeah.
And so, like, I don't know that it helps all that much as someone who was previously a tip worker and may or may not have declared only a minority of my tips. Like, so there's that aspect of it already. And then it's like a pretty targeted form of relief
Yeah.
that I don't really like. I'm like, okay, yeah, fine, whatever, do it. But mainly
Yeah.
because it doesn't have that much of an impact, and therefore it doesn't have that much of an impact.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my thought on it is, number one, and I'm sure that we could do an entire segment just about this, but I think the entire practice of tipping is a problematic practice.
Yeah.
It is literally just us subsidizing businesses that don't want to fucking pay their employees. Like that.
Yeah.
That's literally what it is. I don't know why it's okay that there is a different minimum wage for restaurant workers that are not from restaurants that are not willing to pay a living wage, and yet we have to subsidize by paying more than the price of goods.
Yes.
Like it is a completely arbitrary system. It is a stupid system. And my biggest problem with this is that it kind of further ingrains that system that I don't think should exist in the first place.
Sure. It like helps that system by helping the people that benefit from that system. Or I shouldn't say benefit, but helping the people that are a part of that system. It just perpetuates it.
Well, no. And I would say that like the biggest victims of the system of tipping are the actual employees.
Yes.
Because they should
Those
be
who require
paid
tips.
They should be paid a living wage. Like they should just be paid a living wage, full stop. Why are we saying that restaurants can get away with paying you, what is it, like some type like $2 a fucking hour?
$2.13 in
$2
states that have
like,
a $7.25 minimum wage, yeah.
Like how the hell is that okay?
Yeah,
so
totally.
I guess my whole thing is on one hand, I rarely meet a tax cut for the working class that I don't like.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like you said, it's kind of a weird place to draw the line at. And also like, why is it that, so say you're a restaurant worker and you're earning like, let's say $35,000 a year. All right. Why should you have to get lower taxes, like pay lower taxes than say someone who's working in a McDonald's who maybe they make the same amount, but because you get it based on tips and they get it based on salary, why should you benefit from that and they shouldn't?
It just doesn't seem to have any actual rationale.
Yeah. Which, if you want to do like the equivalent of a tax cut across the board, then go for it. Like I'm all for that. I just don't see why tip workers are the ones that need to benefit primarily.
Totally. I mean,
but
like if we draw it to its logical conclusion, it basically incentivizes people to move into tipped work because you can earn the same amount of money and save money on taxes. Yeah. And like maybe that's their goal. Like I don't really know why that would be the goal though. That doesn't make sense.
I don't know. So like it's not a hill that I would die on. It's
also
not something that I think is going to be bad. And if it helps people, like fine, go for it. Fine.
Yeah. Yeah. The next policy that she has discussed pretty widely and is very broadly popular is a permanent enhancement of the child tax credit from $2,000 right now up to $3,600, I think is the raised proposal. So there was an enhancement of the child tax credit back in 2021 that was introduced as a response to COVID hardship. And the share of children in poverty, this is crazy, fell by nearly half that year, thanks primarily to this tax benefit. So the fact that you can get an enhanced amount of tax credit, and remember, this is a tax credit, not a deduction. You're not reducing the amount of your taxable income by that amount. You're actually able to capture the full dollar value of that tax credit right off the top of your taxes. And so this is pretty excellent, and it applies to single filers who earn under $200,000 a year, or married couples who earn under $400,000 a year. And so, yeah, it gives people enhanced relief when they have kids.
And on top of that, there is a $6,000 tax credit for newborns during the first year of their life.
Yes,
which
is huge.
Which is huge, because I can tell you, as somebody who's currently has a newborn in the first year of her life, I don't have as much money as I have in previous years.
Yeah.
So like I mean, obviously that particular thing won't benefit me by the time it passes, if it theoretically does pass. But like the primary extension, the $3,600, that is a huge game changer. And as Michael said, that was shown to actually reduce childhood poverty. And this is effectively a tax cut on the working class for having kids. This is incentivizing people to have kids. This is the most pro-family policy that you can have, like that you can think of.
And it's a pro-working policy.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I think like Republicans often overlook when they talk about tax credits. Tax credits benefit people who pay taxes, and this tax credit benefits people that have kids. So primarily you pay taxes from your job. And so like it incentivizes people to both have jobs and have kids, which is like a very Republican like benefiting platform. Like they love that shit.
Yeah. And there was actually recently a vote on the child tax credit, which, by the way, J.D. Vance claims that he supports, and he didn't make it to that vote.
Oh, interesting. I wonder what he's up to.
He didn't make it to that vote.
Well, I think he had a hot date that night. Granted, I don't think they left the couch.
Keep them coming. Keep them coming.
That's what the couch said. It's going to be a long election season, folks.
It is going to, yeah.
Another plan that she has described is to increase the maximum credit for workers without dependent children to roughly $1,500 or so. So this was similarly a tax credit that was originally rolled out as part of the 2021 American Rescue Plan. And yeah, it's a tax credit. That's great. Puts money in people's pocket, get them out there spending and stuff. The one thing that like I think a lot of economists would point to with regard to all of these like tax credits, and like, I don't know, a lot of these were rolled out as part of the American Rescue Plan. The American Rescue Plan, while saving the U.S. economy, is also on the hook, according to, some economists, for helping to drive inflation. So that might be something that people are concerned about as well, as part of a price reducing effort to help to like circle back and put money in people's pockets. Ultimately, though, like this is about a comprehensive economic agenda. If this were the only thing, we might be concerned. I might be concerned about that. But in combination with, like raising taxes elsewhere, and having targeted cost reduction strategies across a number of fronts, including housing and healthcare, I think like as well as like specifically trying to roll out federal bans on price gouging. We might be in a more protected spot from the ability to put money in people's pocket and increase income while also increasing affordability.
Which one thing to keep in mind for all of these proposals is that all of these proposals do affect revenue, which means that if the Democrats keep control of the Senate, they don't necessarily need to get rid of the filibuster to pass some of these.
Yeah, fair enough.
They could theoretically pass them through budget reconciliation, because all of these would affect revenue, would affect budget. So that is something to consider about the potential viability of these. And another thing to consider is that if we do keep control of the Senate, which is very much up in the air, it's probably like we're probably less likely to take it than we are likely to take it, as Michael and I kind of talked about in our episode predicting the Senate. But if we do take it, then a lot of these are potentially possible.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Harris is proposing is to provide $25,000 in down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. Now, this is one of those things that I think a lot of people, especially people that were raised on Reaganomics.
Yeah.
Which I'm not saying I was raised on Reaganomics, but like that's definitely something that you're taught in schools. Is basically the immediate reaction is if you give a bunch of people money, then that's going to increase the prices of everything.
Sure.
So that is one of the concerns. That is one of the counter arguments.
Yeah.
But here's what I would say to that. Number one, you're forgetting the fact that wealthy people often receive down payment assistance anyway from relatives, or not even just wealthy. Sometimes like upper middle class. My parents actually helped me on the first house that I ever bought. I was given $10,000, which was actually an inheritance from my grandmother to help me with that down payment, and that $10,000 has heavily increased as houses that I've bought and sold have generated more and more equity. So that ended up being a major investment. So not only was I given $10,000, but by my second house, which had major equity on it, that $10,000 had become like $50,000. Just because of buying and selling houses and the increase of equity. So one thing to consider is that wealthy people and upper middle class people already do get a certain amount of assistance, oftentimes from their relatives. But another thing to consider is that the people that know where the money is actually coming from are the mortgage lenders, not the sellers. All right. So you can't necessarily jack up your prices because this particular, like if you're selling a house, you can't set the asking price at a certain level because that this particular buyer is going to be able to pay for some of that down payment because they're a first time buyer. The only people that are going to know that are the mortgage lenders.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that's a great point on individual like sale. Basically, on any individual sale, it enables first-time home buyers to better compete for prices. You hear it time and time again in these like hot retail markets. You will just have people outbid. You're literally in a bidding war. Sometimes you don't even get to see the house before you've got to lay down hundreds of thousands of dollars in an offer. Like waiving inspections. Like it is a tough time to buy a house, and you are in direct competition with other people trying to buy that same house. And so it gives first-time buyers a leg up because the whole goal here is to be able to enable people to start their journey of owning a home, which is the number one way that people build wealth in this country. Yeah. And so it is about giving that entry point a leg up. Because to Nathan's point, starting is the most important part, because once you start, the rising tide, you're in a boat that a rising tide can lift. The other thing is it's a targeted subsidy. It's to first-time home buyers. It's not to every home buyer. And so, yes, there might be some like impact to inflation or to house prices. Like they may go up. There are going to be more people with the ability to live in a home that they own, which is a good thing. But they're going to go up less than, they won't absorb the full value of this credit because there will be people out there who aren't eligible for this credit, which is just the nature of a targeted subsidy like this.
Yeah. And also subsidies like this do already exist. Like maybe not to this extent, but subsidies for first-time home buyers, there are programs all around the country that help people with stuff like this, depending on their income level. So it's not like this is novel.
Yeah. Plus the other thing is, importantly, this is paired with home construction focused policies as well.
Yes.
So I think that is something we should really like not forget as we're evaluating policy by policy, is that it's a plan. It's not it's not a single policy that's going to be the silver bullet. It's like, let's give first-time home buyers a leg up. Let's give home builders a leg up. Let's give like large corporations buying homes to rent out a bit of a leg down. Like, let's, kind of try to equalize this playing field a little bit and expand supply overall. So there's a lot of things moving here to help that whole thing. It's not going to be obvious that like just a subsidy for first-time home buyers is going to blow up housing costs.
Yeah, exactly. Next, you want to talk about small business tax credits?
Yeah, let's do it.
So one of the proposals that Harris is doing, and this is, I think this is one of the policies that I think really does characterize how she's selling this. She's selling her economic plan as creating an opportunity economy.
Yes.
And I think that this is a really interesting one. She is proposing a $50,000 tax deduction for new small businesses, which so currently there already is a tax deduction for small businesses, and it's $5,000. So this is basically 10 times the current the current tax deduction. The goal is to have 25 million new small businesses within the first 2 years of her presidency. So on average, it takes about $40,000 to start a new business. And on top of that, one of the things to keep in mind is they don't actually have to take this tax deduction right off the bat. Like they can wait until they start making a profit and use this tax deduction for that profit that is generated a little bit later down the line.
Yeah, and because this deduction is specifically for startup expenses. So currently they can deduct like $5,000, but to Nathan's point, the increased $50,000 deduction for startup expenses actually more closely aligns with the amount of money it costs to start a business. And then, to Nathan's point, you can wait until you actually make money, which is when you can actually recognize the benefit of a deduction in order to actually get that full value.
Yeah.
So a huge benefit to small businesses and something that can really encourage someone to take the leap to open a business.
And also, I don't see like I love this policy because it's going to bait Republicans into coming out against it, which Republicans are always trying to pretend we're the pro-business party. And by extension, they try to say, no, we love small businesses. Small businesses are great. But the thing is, when the Republicans say that they're pro-business, what they mean is that they're pro-big business.
Yeah.
All right. Something like this. And again, this is in the form of a tax deduction. This is not just like free money. All right.
Yes.
This is in the form of a tax deduction. So they're selling it as basically a tax cut. Again, as basically a tax cut. And number two, it is something that is specifically geared towards promoting businesses, which, by the way, just so you know, if Harris was a communist, as they claim she is, she would not be pro-small business. That's not how communism works. So, it's, I mean, honestly, this is the type of thing where if the Republican parties were actually true fiscal conservatives, this policy would be right up their alley.
Yeah.
All right. So the question is, are they going to take the bait and come out against it? Or, are they going to be like, well, fuck, I guess we need to at least throw them a bone.
Yeah. Yeah, and she's along with this proposed a slew of policies to help reduce bureaucracy for starting a small business.
Yes.
So
cutting regulation and red tape.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, she sounds like a Republican. No, exactly. Like making it easier to file taxes with a standard by creating a standard deduction for small businesses. Making it easier for them to overall operate, making it easier to operate across state lines. Ensuring that 1/3 of federal contract dollars go to small businesses to help the federal government directly support small businesses, and then helping to providing for programs that enhance and support investment in small businesses in low income communities. Again, the combination, the overlap of policies to help support these low income people in communities as well, and do that with industry and small business. It's a pretty classic playbook, and it could be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's also proposed a bunch of different housing proposals. So, in addition to the credit for first time home buyers, she's discussed implementing the first ever tax incentive for builders who specifically build starter homes that are then sold to first time buyers. So, again, $25,000 tax credit and then a tax incentive if you sell to a first time buyer and build them a home to help address that shortage problem. She's also proposed expanding the existing tax incentive for building affordable renting housing units. So on top of like bolstering ownership, also helping to reduce the cost of rents by building like more affordable housing. She's also proposed creating a $40 billion fund specifically targeted at like developing and innovating new housing construction methods to like help build more houses and build them more efficiently and with less of an environmental impact. She's also proposed, interestingly, a ban on algorithm-driven price-setting tools for landlords. So this is actually in combination with a proposal to remove tax benefits for investors who buy large numbers of single-family rental homes. Basically, the goal of these things is to try to remove the effect of large business interests, or reduce the effect of large business interests and coordination in setting higher and higher rental prices by buying up supply and coordinating to drive up the cost of rents.
Let's talk about anti-price gouging. So this is the one where I think Republicans have been doing the most telling on themselves for. So as Michael and I have established 100 times on this pod, the primary driver of inflation, of the current inflation, is corporate greed. Now, what's kind of funny is while I was reading the Forbes article that kind of laid out a lot of these proposals, there's actually a place on the grocery prices where it says some economists have questioned the idea that price gouging worsens inflation. To which I responded with, yeah, and they're fucking wrong.
Yeah.
So
how could it not? It's in the name.
So let me go back to some numbers that I have said that I've given on this pod thousands of times, but we're just going to give it one more time. The Bureau of Economic Analysis, in conjunction with the Economic Policy Institute, laid out where the increase in the price in the corporate sector, where the increase in the price of goods within the corporate sector, where that money went towards within the years of quarter 2 of 2020 and quarter 4 of 2021, and they compared that to the average of the previous previous 40 years, right? And what they found was that corporate profits accounted for 53.9% of the increase in the prices, and compare that with only 11.4% in the previous 40 years. All right? The non-labor costs, which it's important to look at the non-labor costs because that will tell you how much the pandemic, the supply chains had an impact. During the pandemic, it was 38.3%. Before the pandemic, it was 26.8%. So it was an increase. That did contribute. But 11.4% versus 53.9%. That proves without a shadow of a doubt that the primary driver of inflation was corporate greed, which means that this is a form of price gouging. Now, one of the things to understand is that in about 30 states, there are already laws on the books against price gouging. All right. If there is a disaster that hits a state, like say a tornado blows apart a town, in a lot of states, if you mark up your good, if you're the only store that's left standing, so you're the only store that has water, if you mark up your goods by more than say, usually it's around 10% or so of the of what that price had previously been, you can get charged for that shit. In some
Mhm.
states, it's a civil offense. In some states, it's a fucking criminal offense.
Yeah,
All right.
totally. I mean, for things like water, like, I mean, like the fucking, you know, neoliberal economist is going to be like, well, there's going to be a water shortage. And then it's like, there is a water shortage. And also, people can't do without water. So
Yeah.
having a price competitive market for water is not the way to solve a water shortage.
Yeah. Yeah. So to be clear, this policy addresses the underlying cause of inflation, which is, as is colloquially been called greedflation.
Yeah.
Because of that, it makes total sense to do a federal crackdown on price gouging, because again, the current rate of inflation is not completely just the natural result of the pandemic or the natural result of the free markets. It was corporations taking advantage of the media frenzy over inflation as an excuse to raise prices even more. So what this does is it targets specifically the percentage increase in comparison to previous prices on goods that corporations have done, and also taking into account how much the increase of costs are also associated with that. So like, how much did you have to pay more in terms of terms of whoever is supplying your goods? In order to get your items, in order to have your stock.
See, that's the thing. People talk about like price controls, quote unquote, or like, price limitations, as if we don't have all the information that it would be necessary to check this.
Yeah.
Like I think a striking and simple example is that, like, since 2019, and this is something that Paris points out, since 2019, we've seen a 26% increase in grocery prices, right? Meanwhile, 2019 to 2023, grocery store profit margins increased from 2.9% to 4.4%, nearly a 50% increase in profit margins.
Yeah.
So right there, they're like, we're seeing profit margins increase at a much higher rate, which means that they are making more money per, making more money per dollar of goods than they were before. So if you're in the midst of, especially during an emergency, and you're seeing profit margins go up, you know that they're increasing. The profit margins are all in, right? It's not like they're making less money; they're making more profit. So, I just don't understand why people are pretending like we don't have a way to tell.
Yeah.
If someone is making more money off increasing their prices,
and it's something that's accounted for. It's something that is accounted for. So I think that Republicans are trying to use this as a, hit her on it as hard as we can, use it to call her a communist. It'd be like, Harris just needs to be like, you're against this, you're pro price gouging. Okay.
Yeah.
Just plain and simple, you're pro price gouging. Just keep saying that.
The other thing that goes along with this is another policy priority of hers and also Biden's, which is helping to support the Federal Trade Commission in preventing and combating consolidation. Because a huge part of especially grocery price increases is that we have seen over the past couple of decades a consistent trend towards the consolidation of grocery stores, where you've got just a couple of grocery retailers that own pretty much every grocery brand. And as a result, there isn't effective large-scale competition that can bid down prices, which means all prices move in one direction, which is up, which means that the only way to address affordability, if you don't have competition competing prices down, this is a nod to you, conservative economists, if you don't have competition competing prices down, the only way to address affordability is to drive wages up, which is something that Republicans are also against. So, like, there just isn't a way that the market is going to naturally correct for this without, like, focusing on directly addressing prices and combating consolidation. And now it's time for a more lighthearted segment, a tip for good. So Nathan, why do we do tips for good every week?
Well, Michael, I'm so glad you asked, because we do tips for good every week because I came in like a wrecking ball. I just closed my eyes and swung.
Yeah.
Fuck, what's the rest of it?
I never fell so hard in love.
That's it. I never fell so hard in love. All you ever did was reheck me.
Ugh. That's so true. I feel like that was you with our last segment. You came in like a wrecking ball. You were like, arguments against unrealized capital gains tax. Fuck you.
Like I said, I am really looking forward to arguing with my dad about that.
And wrecking systems of inequality that drive wealth growth for the richest people while keeping all of the rest of us in stuck in our in economically declining situation. Wrecking those systems makes the world a better place.
It does.
So maybe we should just go with that.
It does. Although I'm also realizing that because we're rearranging the episode, these people haven't heard that yet. So this is
gotcha. We're splitting it in half.
No,
that makes
but
sense.
It's okay because this is a preview, and you know
teaser.
What? Teasers make the world a better place too.
That's true. Yeah, there you go. So we should just skip to that.
Yeah.
So Nathan, what exactly is our making the world a better place tip for good?
So I know that it is tempting to tout the fact that there are a lot of our former political enemies, well, current and former political enemies, that are endorsing Kamala Harris because they don't like Trump. And you know what? Great. We'll take their vote. But you know what? That doesn't mean you have to tout it. Specifically, let's not forget that despite the fact that Dick Cheney is supporting Kamala Harris, that he is a torturing, warmongering war criminal who deserves to be in fucking prison.
Snaps.
So, I maybe this isn't quite as lighthearted, but it's just a reminder that Dick Cheney is still a dick. He is a horrible, 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 heartless, evil, terrible human being. And you know what? Don't forget that. Like, just because he now is going to be voting for the same person that I'm voting for doesn't mean that he is any less of a shitbag, of a horrible human being. All right?
Totally.
Stop trying to rehabilitate the Bush administration just because they don't like Trump.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It should not make you like Dick Cheney more.
Yeah.
Now, it should make you like Kamala Harris just a tiny little bit less.
Yeah.
Not that you shouldn't go vote for her, but just a teeniest little bit. Just be like, if may fuck you.
Yeah.
And it should make you like Trump even less, because if someone like Dick Cheney can't stomach him,
yeah,
my God.
Yeah. So like, I mean, yeah, if I'm Kamala Harris, I'm like, fuck you very much. I don't want your endorsement. Go vote for Trump.
Yep. Yeah.
Like, I would seriously say, Dick Cheney, I would rather you vote for Trump.
So never forget, Dick Cheney's a dick.
And that's tips for
Tips
good.
for good.
All right, you want to talk about the increase in capital gains tax?
Yes, let's do it.
So this is an interesting one, because I want you all to realize that there is a lot of misinformation going around about Kamala Harris's tax policies.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you see a scary number associated with one of Kamala Harris's tax policies and a claim that this is a tax on the middle class or a war on the middle class, that is bullshit. All right? That is bullshit. I keep seeing conservative relatives of mine sharing this really scary number, this really scary number, 44.6%. All right? They've been sharing the number 44.6%. And they're like, this is the tax that Kamala Harris is going to be implementing on capital gains, which means that, if you sell your house, if your parents sell their house or anything like that, or if they have a retirement account, then that means that they're trying to take 44.6% of all of the increase in value of those assets. So this is a lie on top of a lie.
Yeah.
Like,
and
there-
I'll
there-
admit,
there's
I've been
actually-
taken in by at least one of those lies.
Yeah.
I'll admit it right here on the pod.
Yeah.
Nathan had to call me out.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and even that is actually the one that I had to call you out on. That's a little bit of a
The
different
third
one than
lie?
this. That's,
Yeah.
yeah. So for this particular one, here's where they get that number 44%. So, Joe Biden, his initial policy plan for the fiscal year budget 2025 was to call for the long-term capital gains rate to be increased to 39.6%, which would basically put it in line with the highest earners for income tax. Now, this would only apply to people who are making $1 million per year. If you are not making $1 million per year, this does not affect you.
And note, because we have a bracketed tax system, that 39.6% only applies to the money you make over that amount. Like,
Exactly.
So it's on your million and first dollar.
Exactly. On top of this, there's a proposal to raise the net investment income tax, also known as the NIIT, from what it currently is 3.8% to 5%. Now, the NIIT is basically it's a tax that applies to some investments that exceed $200,000 for single filers or $250,000 for married couples. So the way that they get that 44.6% number that some of you might have seen if you have conservative relatives who are sharing this bullshit is by adding the NIIT to that proposal for the capital gains. Because effectively together, it would be around that rate it would be around that rate for capital gains. But again, the increase of NIIT only accounts to people making $200,000 for single filers or $250,000 for married couples. And again, that is only money in the increase in the value of assets. That's not your total income. That's just the increase in the value of the assets.
Yeah.
And then, of course, for people making over $1 million per year. So the idea is, if you're making more than $1 million per year, odds are you're probably you're going to be making $200,000 per year as well in terms of your investment earnings for that NIIT. So that's where they get the 44.6%. So part of the lie is that it only applies to people who are making above $1 million per year. On top of that, Harris's proposal is actually more modest than Biden's proposal. See, because Harris is proposing not taxing capital gains at the federal income tax, which she fucking should, but she's not. Instead, she's proposing raising it to 28%. All right, she wants to raise this from 28%. Currently, it is 20%. So this would only be an 8% increase. And again, only affects people that are making $1 million annually. She does support the increase from 3.8% to 5% for the NIIT. So, if you add the 5% to that, then we're talking about a combined rate of 33% for the top earners, which is much lower than Biden's plan. But that's her plan. And look, I actually criticize her plan from a leftist perspective of not going as far as Biden's plan, because why the fuck wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why the fuck would you tax the highest earners, the richest people in the country, at a lower rate than you would tax the rest of the country,
specifically on their
because
realized
they have
income?
Yeah. This is on realized income. All right, this is
from
on realized
investments.
income.
So this is not labor income.
Yeah.
Why would we advantage investment income over labor income for the wealthiest people?
Yeah, you're sitting on your ass while your money makes money, and then you liquidate those assets. Why should you be paying a lower rate for those liquidized assets than those of us who are who are making money through a salary. It makes no fucking sense. The fact that we have a different rate for capital gains and income tax is the biggest bullshit. You know, it was one of the biggest pieces of bullshit in our unequal ass tax code.
Yeah.
So the fact that she's not raising it as much as Biden was proposing to do it is fucking disappointing to me. But still, if she raises it more than it currently is, that is good. That is a good thing.
Totally. Yeah, and my first reaction when I first heard about that, because people keep leaving out the fact that this applies to people making $1 million or more per year.
Yeah.
And so when I was first hearing about it, I was like, man, that's terrible. Increasing long-term capital gains like tax is going to mean that people who have had appreciation on their homes, the most common way to build wealth in America, you've spent 30 or 40 years in your house doing renovations and increasing equity and all that stuff. You go to sell it when you retire. And that's the nest egg that a lot of people take with them when they go to retire and is like the most important source of wealth for a lot of people. And then we tax that at a higher rate. That's going to hurt the middle class. Nope, it's not, because it only applies to people that are making above a certain threshold of income.
Yeah. Yeah. Which brings us to another really interesting tax proposal that this is the one that I probably went on the deepest rabbit hole. And when I first brought this up with Michael, I actually had to set him straight a little bit on it.
Yeah.
And that is her proposal to tax unrealized capital gains. Now, we already talked about realized capital gains, her proposal to set that tax at 28%, raising that from the current one, which is 20%.
And to realize a capital gain is basically you have purchased an asset at the beginning, right, of a certain cost. Over time, it has gotten more valuable, and when you sell it, the difference in your sale price and the cost that you bought it for, that's capital gain. And realizing it is when you actually go ahead and sell it and are able to claim the cash associated with that capital gain. And so that's specifically the realized portion. So taxing unrealized capital gains, that's just taxing the change in your wealth over time, is a pretty different proposal from the kind of system that we have set up right now.
Yeah. But when we're talking about unrealized capital gains, so one of the biggest reasons why our overall tax system is so fucking unequal, why you've probably seen numbers where some of the richest people have only paid like 1% of their wealth increase over a year. That is because until an asset, or at least a corporate stock, is realized, meaning it is sold, it cannot be taxed at all, which means that maybe say you have a stock that's say you have $100 billion worth of stock, right? 1 year, and then the next year you have like those stocks together. Now the value of them can be set at 110 billion. That is an increase of wealth by $10 billion. Now that $10 billion, if that were income, that would just be taxed at an income tax rate, but it's not considered income. And on top of that, because it's unrealized, it's not even considered capital gains yet in terms of as far as taxes are concerned. It is just an increased value that is untaxable. Now, what that means is that you can basically sit on a massive accumulation of wealth until you die, and then when you die, you might have to pay an estate tax.
Mm-hmm.
But as it stands, you can actually pass all of those gains to your heirs, to your next of kin. And basically what that does is all of those assets, all of that capital gains, once it's liquidated, it's not going to be taxed at all. Like, none of that is going to be taxed once it's liquidated. Now, if there is an estate tax, so right off the bat, there's going to be a certain amount of that wealth that is going to be taken. But as soon as it's passed on, it's basically no longer like the equity on it is no longer considered taxable. All right.
Yeah. Plus, there are so many tax professionals that are solely dedicated to ensuring that you're able to pass along your wealth to your heirs for as little tax as possible. So people skirt around the estate tax all the time, to the tune of tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah. Now you might say, well, but then again, if it's just your money is making money, and you can't, and it can be taxed once you liquidate it, well then what does it matter, because you can't use it if it's not liquidated. Well, but here's the problem with that. There actually are ways of still using it without it accounting as taxes. One of the things that people will try to do is they will borrow money and then put their stocks up as collateral. So that way their stocks can continue to make money by increasing in value, and they can have liquid assets that they can then use, that they can, they're going to have to pay interest on.
Sure, but interest right now, the prime rate is 8%.
Yeah.
So like 8% to a bank
versus
30+% to the government. You're saving a ton of money by just sitting on that money, overinflating like asset values, and still able to spend as much of that money as you want tax-free.
Yeah. And then theoretically, when you die, your heirs are going to have to pay off that, are going to have to pay off that loan. They're going to have to pay that off.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the capital gains is no longer going to apply to those assets. So they can very easily just liquidate them, pay no capital gains, because since they got them, it hasn't increased in value. Yeah. And basically there you are with a tax-free amount of money that you have then accumulated. Mm-hmm. So that is our current system. The proposal is to levy a 25% tax on unrealized capital gains. Now, this is another thing that we need to be clear about. This only applies to $100 million in assets. All right? This only applies to $100 million in assets.
Yeah.
That's
what gets you.
That's what gets you. So you might hear that and think, well, does that mean that you're going to have to pay additional taxes on, the tax increase for your house? Like, does that mean you're going to have to pay more in taxes for your house? Which would
be a huge problem. If that were the case, that would be a huge problem because your house is an illiquid asset. You cannot easily say if this were just a flat out 25% tax on all unrealized capital gains. Say you're a retiree, you don't have a lot of cash on hand. You've got a really nice house, or maybe just an okay house that has appreciated a bunch through no fault of your own. The market's going crazy. All of a sudden, you're on the hook for a huge tax bill, and you don't have any cash to cover it. And so for a couple $1,000 tax bill, or maybe a few $1,000 tax bill, you end up getting turned out of your home.
Yeah.
That's the worry that I think Republicans are trying to, fearmonger with. But to Nathan's point, that's only on $100 million of assets or more.
Yeah.
Right. And there are also so many ways to get cash out of your house when it is appreciated in value. And so there just isn't really this concern that actually exists.
So let's talk about some other concerns. And I want to steelman the argument. I want to steelman the argument against it for a second. So some of the concerns are the fact that because the value of stocks fluctuate. All right. The value of stocks are basically an estimation. They're not a real number. They're just an estimation.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's hard to pinpoint an exact number for the value of those assets, which means it's going to be an administrative nightmare. Mm-hmm. On top of that, because you are going to be forcing these people to pay a certain amount of the increase in value of their stocks, because of that, you're actually going to be forcing people to sell off their stocks in order to liquidate their assets in order to pay for this tax. And if they do that, number one, because they will be selling stocks, it will fluctuate the cost of those of those stocks, making it even more difficult to figure out exactly how much those stocks actually are valued at. It forces people to sell a piece of their business, basically, a piece of their ownership in a business. And number two, it's important to recognize that, well, what does that mean if your stocks decrease in value? Does that mean that we have to give you money? Does that mean that we have to refund you money? Like that's worth considering. Another thing that's worth considering, and this is continuing to go along on the Steelman argument. Another thing that's worth considering is that what if we just had a capital gains rate that was fair and equitable, a reasonable estate tax for when that wealth is passed on to kids, to heirs, and we go ahead and get rid of that loophole that says that the increase in value once this has been inherited is no longer taxable in capital gains. Like, what if we did all of that, all right, and just allow these stocks to continue to grow as cash cows, and then once they are sold and liquidated, because they inevitably will be, because they'll have to be, then we can take advantage of them. Treat them as cash cows so that they can continue to increase in value so that you can maximize revenue when they're actually liquidated. So here's why that's bullshit. So one thing that's worth considering is the fact that we actually do have a system in place currently where we do have to pay a tax on our assets. And on top of that, we have to pay a tax on the increase in the value of those assets. You know what it's called? It's called the fucking property
tax.
It's called the fucking property tax. You already have to pay a portion of the increase in value of the asset that you own. We already have mechanisms in place that are used in order to identify how much that increase is and thus increase the amount that you have to pay in your property tax. We already have those systems in place. And if middle class people, because let's be clear. When Michael's already kind of alluded to this in the past in an earlier part of this episode. The biggest level of assets, the most valuable asset that middle class people own in this country are their houses. But the most valuable assets that the upper class people, the top 1% that they own, are their stocks. And yet we have to pay unrealized capital gains effectively. We have to pay taxes on our unrealized capital gains for our property as middle class people, but they don't have to pay it as upper class people.
On more liquid assets, on assets that are easier to buy and sell.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're able to pay your fucking property tax without having to sell your goddamn house, these motherfuckers can afford to pay it. On top of that,
just because it already happens doesn't mean it could ever work.
on top of that, another thing to consider is the fact that the way that this particular policy is laid out, it actually allows for these payments to happen over the course of a few years. That's important to note. So basically, your initial payments for these taxes can actually be made over the course of 9 years, which actually means that if there is a slight reduction in the value of your assets, then a tax that you might have paid ahead of time could potentially be refunded over the course of those years. But because it's happening over the course of those years, it's kind of averaged out. So, it's not like you have one bad year and now the government pays you a bunch of money. It's like you have a bad year, but on average, the last, the next 9 years actually go really well for you. Well, you're able to essentially put in a down payment on your taxes, which, if those gains that you earn over those years end up being less than what were considered, then you might get some of that back. But if they don't, then it averages out. And again, because of the fact that we already have mechanisms in place in order to figure out what the cost of your assets are, like the ability to put them up for collateral, we can't just pretend that the price of those stocks is just an arbitrary number that nobody knows.
Unknowable,
Like, we can't pretend that any more than we can pretend that the price of a house is unknowable. All right? So if that argument had any ground to stand on, then you would basically have to say that property tax could never be a thing, ever.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's actually way harder to know the value of a house than it is to know the value of a stock, because the exact same house in the exact same spot doesn't trade continuously all day, every single fucking day, like the same stock does.
Yeah. And on top of that, let me give you another example of a system that is in place that actually does force you to liquidate assets, but only applies if you're poor or middle class, and doesn't apply if you're rich. And that is retirement accounts. As it stands, when you're looking at families between the 60th and 80th income percentiles, 28% of their assets are in retirement accounts, but only 12% are held directly in corporate stock. For the top 1%, only 5% of their assets are in retirement accounts versus 44% in corporate stocks. Now, once you reach the age of 73, you are actually required to start liquidating your retirement accounts of at least $4,000 for every $100,000 in your balance, in the balance of your account. And once that is liquidated, income tax, not capital gains tax, but income tax is levied against you. Income tax is levied against you. And that tax applies to both the original money that you put into that account, the increase in value that has been accrued in your 401k. So you are being forced to liquidate your assets in order to pay those taxes, because the reason why you have to liquidate those assets at 73 is because they don't want this to be basically a tax scam that you can take advantage of. But if it's the top 1% who, instead of having their assets in retirement accounts, have their assets in corporate stocks, then it's perfectly okay. It's perfectly okay for them to keep those assets non-liquidated. But you're forced to liquidate them if you have it in a retirement account.
And now it's time for one of our favorite segments, a miscellaneous What the Fuck. So Nathan, what the fuck is a miscellaneous What the Fuck?
Well, Michael, I'll tell you what the fuck a miscellaneous What the Fuck is. See, sometimes we like to do stories about people that are particularly heinous individuals. It's called Asshat of the Week.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we like to make fun of people for making self-defeating arguments that are just so stupid that it just we gotta point and laugh and say, hey, everybody, come look at the idiot. But sometimes a story comes across our desk that doesn't really fit into either of those categories, or maybe fits into both of those categories. Something that is just miscellaneous that makes us go, what the fuck?
And we have a doozy.
We have a
this
doozy.
Week. I have pages of notes about this motherfucker, but we're going to keep it short. So this story is about the candidate for governor of North Carolina and current lieutenant governor of North Carolina, Mark Robinson. Now, no one expects you to know who the fuck this guy is, although he might have been a blip on your radar so far this week.
You probably do know who he is at this point.
At this point, yes, you're right. As of 2 or 3 weeks ago, no one would expect you to know.
As of 2 or 3 weeks ago, I didn't know who the fuck he was. Like,
I was keeping track of this guy for reasons that I can't say on air, but I was keeping an eye out for this motherfucker, and he has been an extreme asshole all along. So we're talking about when he was running for lieutenant governor, advocating for a complete ban on abortion without exception. He is fiercely anti-trans. We'll come back to that later. And has mocked survivors of school mass shootings, including the survivors of Marjory Stoneman Douglas shooting in Florida, calling the students spoiled, angry, know-it-all children, spoiled little bastards, media prostitutes.
Ooh, I didn't hear about that one. Jeez.
Yeah,
oh
dude.
my god.
And that
Maybe this is
that's
our ass
before
hat.
things got bad. That's before things got bad, which has happened recently. So he's been involved in a few scandals. As I said, he's fiercely anti-abortion, and it came out last year that he and his wife have had abortions.
I'm
so
shocked.
Obviously,
shocked.
yeah, exactly.
So next you're going to tell me that despite the fact that he's anti-trans, that he has a trans fetish or something.
And that is one of the many things that has recently been uncovered from news reports that have tied him to an old account that he had on a porn site called Nude Africa, where he was a regular poster on message boards on the porn site. So let's say right up front, we're not against porn. Posting on message boards on a porn site is kind of weird, but whatever. Yeah. That's fine. Do what you want.
And of course,
but the things
we're not gonna yuck your yum in terms of taste, unless of course you are publicly an asshole to people that are directly contributing to your taste.
Exactly, and that is a bit of the tie-in to Nathan's scandalous transgender fetish here. So he specifically posted on some of the message boards about being into trans porn, which again, nothing wrong with that. Only when you're a huge anti-trans bigot, it kind of undercuts your bona fides on the matter. So I don't really care too much about it, except for the fact that he's a bigot.
Yeah.
But it might alienate some of his more conservative evangelical supporters who are as anti-trans publicly and privately as he is publicly.
Yeah. But that's the extent of it, right?
No, well, that's actually probably the most minor of the discoveries that have been part of this. One thing that's important to note here is that this is confirmed that this is this guy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he was posting with a username. It's the same username he has on Twitter.
Yeah.
And fucking YouTube. Like, this is his public username.
Apparently, like, it has a bunch of details about him from like where he grew up to his favorite episode of The Twilight Zone.
That's the honestly weirdest part
why would you put
about this whole story.
Why would you put that in the profile of like in a porn profile?
He has posted so many things just about his like normal life. It's so fucking sad that he's on like a porn message board like, my wife and I just celebrated our 9th anniversary. It's like, what the fuck,
I mean,
it's
weird,
together.
but again, we're not at the point where like, I would like, I'd say that's weird, but that we're not at the point where I would say you're done. Like
disqualified for office. No, of course not. Of course not. Except when he posted, quote, "I'm a black Nazi." And the problem with that is the Nazi part of it.
Who wants to tell him?
Yeah, seriously. It's
what the fuck?
This came about.
Okay, that's disqualified.
Yeah, totally. So this came about in this thread, right, where he was like publicly attacking Martin Luther King Jr. on this message board, calling him a commie bastard, worse than a maggot, a hoe fucking phony, and a huckster. And someone on the thread accused him of being part of the KKK, and he goes, "I'm not in the KKK. They don't let blacks join. If I was in the KKK, I would have called him Martin Lucifer Coon." I hate even saying that. And so, then he referred to himself as a black Nazi. Also, this is just the stuff that's reported like publicly in CNN. They were say repeatedly in a bunch of these articles, like, not everything that he posted is public because it's too graphic.
Yeah.
And we're not going to write about it.
Yeah.
He also went on to say that slavery is not bad. This is a direct quote. "Slavery is not bad. Some people need to be slaves. I wish they would bring it back." It referring to slavery. "I would certainly buy a few."
Again, who wants to tell him? Who wants to tell him that, if you were around during slavery, my friend, you would not be the one owning slaves.
And it's like, and that's horrible, right? Like, that's awful.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know how someone can be so ahistorical. Honestly, it's beyond satire.
Yeah.
Like, this made me think of the Chappelle Show, The Black White Supremacist.
Yeah.
And like, this guy's actually more insane than that satire by Dave Chappelle, because that guy had never seen his reflection because he was blind from birth.
Yeah.
So that like, this guy knows.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
this guy,
absolutely
I
fucking
don't know. Maybe
crazy.
he's never looked into a mirror.
I can't. I have no idea. I really, I'm beyond words for this
So-
dude. Because
So
like,
naturally,
not only is he horrible,
Yeah.
but he is also like has this just terrible
yeah,
history.
and naturally, Trump believes that this guy is basically better than Martin Luther King.
Which he's basically
He
said.
he has said that. He has said this
Yeah.
guy. It was something. He said something along the lines of like, "This is Martin Luther King like on steroids." Like this
on
is
steroids. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Now,
which he probably
the
took as an
best part about
insult.
this story. Yeah, exactly. He was like that commie bastard. The best part of this story, though, is that since then, he has refused to drop out of the race, which is hilarious because he literally had like just a couple of days for him to not be the candidate if they wanted to after the story broke, and he refused to drop out. And so his whole fucking staff, except for like 2 people, resigned. And he's and all of the like all of his like ad buys and stuff, the Republican Government Association stopped buying ads for him. GOP leadership is now worried that he could alienate enough voters to undo the Republican supermajority in North Carolina. And even Trump has stopped bringing him up at rallies. So the bottom has fallen out of his campaign. Yeah. He's now well trailing his Democratic opponent. And so honestly, he might get at least a small portion of his comeuppance.
God, what a weird story. What a weird story.
So fucking weird. So fucking weird. And honestly, go look up more about this dude. He's fucking nuts. And this is honestly not the only porn scandal that has happened for this guy recently. Yeah. So I'll leave that little Easter egg out there. So that's a miscellaneous what the fuck. And now it's time to end our show as we usually do with our highlights. So Nathan, what's your highlight this week?
Well, Michael, I don't want to preemptively show you up again, but my highlight is yet another developmental milestone.
No way.
For the first time, my daughter was able to stand up all by herself without having to pull herself up. All right. She's been able to pull herself up, like, grab on stuff and pull herself up. But no, she straight up stood up without having to pull anything, without having to pull herself, and stood for a little bit. Didn't take any steps, but stood for a little bit, balanced for a little bit, then fell on her butt. And I was like, holy shit. I just witnessed another historical miracle.
Yeah. That's amazing, dude. Congratulations. That is awesome.
Yep. What about you, Michael? What's your highlight?
Oh, I don't know. Some bullshit, I guess. I don't know. I've been, the weather's been nice. I've gotten to play tennis and volleyball over the last couple of days. That's been pretty fun, I guess. For some garbage. My life has no meaning. Anyway, now we'll thank all the amazing people that make this show possible.
You don't need kids to give your life meaning, okay?
Sure, but it helps. Thank you to our amazing patrons.
We're not people.
That's true.
We're not people that judge a person for being a childless we've never had any inappropriate relations with any upholstery either.
Yes, exactly. So we're 2 points ahead of JD Vance. No, of course not. And I'm just saying my life doesn't have meaning. I'm not saying that everybody without kids don't have meaningful lives. So thanks to our amazing patrons, Jerry DeViller, Taylor Bloom, Fade Out Scoop, Kyle Cheska, and Tobias Janssen for supporting the show and making it possible. And thank you to our incredible editor, Kayla, for all they do to put the show on air. And thank you, dear listener, for listening to The Perspectrum. And you'll hear from us again next week.